Imagine losing everything you've ever loved, and then watching the person who took it from you walk free. No justice, no consequences, just silence. What do you do when the law, the very system you trusted, fails you? This is the story of Daniel Carter, a father whose world was shattered in an instant when his daughter, Emily, was brutally murdered. For him, life stopped the day her laughter was stolen from him. But when the man responsible for her death, Lucas Matthews, is set free on a technicality, Daniel is consumed by rage and heartbreak. With no one to hold accountable, Daniel is left with one burning question: how do you seek justice when the system betrays you? But as Daniel embarks on a journey for revenge, a mysterious stranger delivers a chilling warning. There's something much darker behind Emily's death than he could have ever imagined. The path Daniel is about to walk could cost him his soul, or something even more precious. Can a father avenge his daughter's death without losing everything else? Will justice be served, or will vengeance consume him? What Daniel is about to face isn't just a fight for justice, it's a test of everything he believes in. The journey begins now, and I promise you, you won't want to miss a single moment of what happens next. Before we dive in, take a moment to subscribe. Stories like this deserve to be heard, and together, we can make sure they get the attention they deserve. Daniel Carter stood motionless at the front of the church, his hand resting lightly on the smooth, cold wood of the pew. The weight of the moment pressed against his chest, as if the very air had turned dense, suffocating. His daughter, Emily, was supposed to be here, her laughter echoing through the halls, her presence filling every room with light. But now, only silence remained, and that silence was unbearable. The church was full, but Daniel hardly noticed anyone around him. He barely registered the soft murmurs, the quiet sobs of the people who had come to say goodbye to his sweet girl. His eyes, red-rimmed and hollow, were fixed on the casket before him, a stark, sterile box that held his daughter's body. She had been taken from him, violently, senselessly. And the man responsible for it, Lucas Matthews, was sitting just a few rows behind him. Daniel's throat tightened, the swell of grief threatening to choke him. Matthews had killed his daughter. And now, after a trial that had dragged on for months, the man was free. Not because the evidence didn't point to him, but because of a technicality, some mistake made by the very system that was supposed to protect people like Emily. A loophole, a missed deadline, a detail overlooked. Lucas Matthews, the man who had taken Daniel's world apart, was allowed to walk out of that courtroom a free man, as if Emily had never mattered, as if the crime he'd committed was of no consequence. The tears that had been threatening to fall all morning finally broke free. But no one saw them. Daniel wiped his face quickly, his hands shaking as he did. He had to stay composed. He had to be strong, for Emily's memory, for his wife, for the son who still needed a father to lean on. But in that moment, strength felt like a distant concept. The man who killed his daughter was walking free, and there was nothing he could do about it. The law had failed him. The sermon droned on in the background, the words a blur as they bounced off the walls and mixed with the sound of his pulse thudding in his ears. Daniel tried to focus on the speaker, tried to feel something other than the gnawing anger that ate away at his insides, but it was impossible. His mind kept flashing back to the trial, to the day Matthews had smiled as the verdict was read, as if he were victorious. The smug look on his face, Daniel would never forget it. He felt a sharp pain in his chest, the memory of the courtroom still raw. Emily's killer had stared him down with those cold, lifeless eyes, knowing full well that he had just been handed a second chance. And Daniel? He had been left with nothing but a shattered heart and the relentless ache of loss. The sound of footsteps broke through Daniel's thoughts. He glanced up, his gaze locking with Matthews, who had stood up and was walking toward the back of the church. Lucas Matthews, the man who had destroyed everything. Daniel's stomach twisted into knots, a sudden, almost primal anger rising up in him. He stood up before he even realized what he was doing, his body moving of its own accord. His hands clenched into fists at his sides, his pulse quickening. He could feel the eyes of the mourners on him, but it didn't matter. The only thing that mattered in that moment was Matthews. Without a second thought, Daniel strode toward the aisle, his feet pounding the floor with a sense of purpose. His breath came in sharp, ragged bursts, each one heavy with the weight of everything he had lost. The closer he got to Matthews, the more the world seemed to shrink around him. The grief, the anger, the helplessness, all of it pressed down on him like a vice. Matthews, unaware of the storm brewing behind him, walked casually toward the exit, his back to Daniel. His posture was relaxed, as if he hadn't just walked out of the courtroom a free man after committing murder. The audacity, the coldness. "Lucas!" Daniel's voice rang out, loud and sharp, cutting through the stillness of the church. The name felt like a knife in his throat as he said it, each syllable thick with the venom he had been holding back. Matthews stopped, his shoulders stiffening slightly. He turned slowly, a smug smile spreading across his face. "What's the matter, Carter? You upset?" he taunted, his voice dripping with mock sympathy. Daniel's heart pounded in his chest, the blood rushing in his ears. He took a step forward, his anger building to a fever pitch. "You think you can just walk away from this? You killed my daughter, and you get to walk free?" His voice cracked, but the fury in his words only grew louder. Matthew's smile didn't falter. He stood there, like a man who knew the power he wielded. "It's over, Daniel. The courts have spoken. There's nothing more to say." A flash of memory hit Daniel like a physical blow. He remembered the courtroom, the silence after the verdict, the way Matthews had smirked, his family cheering from the back. He remembered the judge's voice, the words that had sent Emily's killer home. The world seemed to tilt. All of his pain, all of his grief, spiraled into a singular, overwhelming feeling, the need to make Matthews pay. In that instant, the idea of justice felt distant. What had the law given him? What had it given his daughter? Nothing but more pain. His hands trembled, and before he knew it, they were reaching for Matthews, grabbing the collar of his shirt. The other man's eyes widened in surprise, but it wasn't fear, not yet. "You don't get to do this, Daniel," Matthews sneered. "I'm untouchable. You're nothing." Daniel's grip tightened, his fingers digging into the fabric. His mind was a blur of rage and sorrow. He wanted to hurt him. He wanted to make him feel even a fraction of the pain he had caused. He wanted to see Matthews suffer the way he had suffered. But just as he was about to pull the man closer, a voice, a quiet but firm voice, cut through the chaos. "Let him go." Daniel froze. The voice wasn't loud, but it held an undeniable authority. He turned his head toward the sound, his grip still firm on Matthews. Standing just a few feet away was a woman, a stranger by the looks of her, but there was something in her eyes. Something that made Daniel hesitate. The woman's gaze was steady, unflinching. She didn't look afraid. She didn't look concerned. She looked like she knew something he didn't. "Who are you?" Daniel asked, his voice hoarse. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she stepped closer, her eyes never leaving his. "This is bigger than you think," she said, her voice low, but sharp. "Let him go." Daniel looked from her to Matthews, then back to her again. His anger, his grief, was fighting against the sense of something darker, something deeper that hung in the air. He had no time for cryptic warnings. He just wanted justice. He just wanted to make Matthews pay. But the woman's presence, her calm, collected demeanor, made him pause. The woman's warning echoed in his mind. "This is bigger than you think." What did she mean? And why did it feel like there was something more to Matthew's freedom than just a broken system? As Daniel let go of Matthew's collar, a cold dread settled in his gut. He was no longer sure who the enemy was. Daniel stood frozen, his hands still hovering in the air where he just let go of Lucas Matthews' collar. The church was silent now, the weight of the woman's words echoing in his mind, pulling him back from the brink. "This is bigger than you think." The words had felt like a punch to the gut, and as Daniel looked at the woman standing before him, something about her unwavering gaze struck him deeper than any of Matthew's taunts ever could. Who was she? Why had she intervened? And what could possibly be bigger than what had just happened to his daughter? Matthews, still trying to regain his composure, looked from the woman to Daniel, a smirk spreading across his face. "What's this? A new friend? You going to take care of me too?" He stepped back, brushing off his shirt, clearly enjoying the power he still held. But Daniel wasn't listening anymore. His eyes were locked on the woman, her expression calm but urgent. The noise of the church, the mourners, Matthews, everything else faded into the background as his mind raced. He felt a pang of guilt. He should have done something, anything. He'd come so close to taking matters into his own hands, but now, in the face of this stranger, it felt like the entire world had shifted beneath him. "You need to listen to me," the woman said, her voice steady, as though she were used to delivering uncomfortable truths. "Matthews isn't just some random criminal. He's part of something much larger. Something that ties directly into your daughter's death." Daniel's pulse quickened. He opened his mouth to speak but was silenced by the woman's hand as she stepped closer. "Not here," she urged, glancing around the room nervously. "We can't talk in public. It's not safe." She was right. Matthews had already begun to slip away, taking his smug satisfaction with him as he disappeared through the door. Daniel felt a knot tighten in his stomach. That was the last thing he needed. Matthews, a ghost in the system, slipping away into the shadows yet again. The woman looked at Daniel, her eyes pleading. "I know you want revenge, Mr. Carter, but your daughter's death is not just a crime of passion. It's a crime of power." "Power," Daniel repeated, confusion clouding his anger. He wanted to feel the fire of rage again, wanted to feel like he could tear the world apart for what Matthews had done, but instead, there was this sinking feeling inside him, one that told him this woman might be the only one who could answer the questions that had been gnawing at him since that courtroom verdict. "Yes," she said softly. "Power. The kind that twists the law to its own will. The kind that ensures criminals like Matthews never see the inside of a jail cell." Daniel's thoughts swirled. The truth was, the justice system had failed him. The law had failed Emily. And Matthews, who should have been rotting in prison, was out there, somewhere, walking free. "Who are you?" Daniel asked, his voice thick with suspicion. "Why are you telling me all this?" The woman hesitated, a fleeting moment of vulnerability passing across her face. Then she drew a deep breath. "I'm someone who knows exactly how far this goes. I used to work for the department. I used to be the one who buried cases like this one." She leaned in, her voice barely above a whisper. "And if you want answers, you need to come with me. This is bigger than you know." Daniel could feel the walls closing in on him, the claustrophobia of his grief suffocating him. Emily, his little girl. He had to find justice. He had to make sure her death wasn't just swept under the rug like so many others before. But as he stood there, staring at the stranger, a voice in the back of his mind told him that whatever path she was leading him down, it wasn't going to be simple. He was already in too deep, and the real question now wasn't whether he could stop, but if he wanted to. "Why should I trust you?" Daniel asked, his voice steady, though his heart was pounding in his chest. He had no time for more games, no room left for deceit. His daughter's justice had to come first, no matter the cost. The woman's gaze softened. She knew this wasn't an easy choice. "Because I'm the only one who can help you get it. The only one who can help you stop what's happening before it's too late." Daniel clenched his fists at his sides, his mind a whirlwind of questions, doubts, and emotions he could no longer control. He had no idea who this woman was, or what kind of game she was playing. But in that moment, a part of him knew, he had no choice but to trust her. "Let's go," he said, his voice low but firm. "But if this is some trick, I swear, I won't hesitate to take matters into my own hands again." The woman gave him a quick, almost imperceptible nod and turned, walking briskly out of the church. Daniel followed, his every step heavy with the weight of his choices. They arrived at a small diner just outside of town, a quiet, almost unnoticeable place where the hum of conversation was replaced by the sound of coffee cups clinking and the occasional buzz of an old jukebox in the corner. The woman led him to a booth in the back, sliding into the seat with practiced ease. Daniel hesitated before sitting across from her, his eyes scanning the room. It was just as she had said, safe, quiet, the perfect place to have a conversation without prying eyes. She leaned in, her voice dropping to a whisper. "There's a reason Matthews is still free, Daniel. And it's not because of some legal loophole. It's because there are people in this town who want to keep him out of prison. People with money, power, connections. People who run the show. Daniel's heart raced as the pieces started falling into place. He had suspected corruption, but hearing it from her mouth felt like a slap to the face. "Who are these people?" he asked, his voice trembling with urgency. The woman shook her head, her expression darkening. "I can't tell you everything yet, but what I can tell you is this: Matthews isn't just a pawn. He's a part of something much bigger. Something that goes all the way to the top. And unless you act fast, unless you dig deeper, the truth will be buried forever." A cold chill ran down Daniel's spine. This wasn't just about one man's freedom. This was about an entire system, an entire network of people who had the power to destroy lives and cover their tracks. "I'll do whatever it takes," Daniel said, the fire of determination rekindled in his chest. He had already lost too much to back down now. The woman nodded, her eyes gleaming with a strange mix of relief and caution. "Good. Because the people behind this won't stop until you're out of the picture. And they'll use everything they have to make sure of it." Daniel's mind raced with the possibilities. His daughter's death had already cost him more than he could bear. Now, the cost of finding the truth would be even higher. As he stood up, ready to follow the woman out of the diner, a sudden crash echoed through the air. The door to the kitchen flew open, and a figure in a dark jacket slipped past the counter. A briefcase in hand, the man's face was partially obscured, but the cold, calculating look in his eyes told Daniel everything he needed to know. The man's eyes locked on Daniel for a split second before he disappeared into the alley behind the diner. Daniel had just learned the first piece of the puzzle. But as the stranger fled, he realized he was no longer just a father seeking justice. He was in the crosshairs of something much bigger. The question was no longer if Matthews would be held accountable, but if Daniel would make it out alive. Daniel's heart pounded in his chest, his breath coming in short bursts as the man in the dark jacket disappeared into the alley. The sight of him, the briefcase in hand, the cold, calculating look in his eyes, was a warning. A warning that Daniel was deeper than he ever imagined. He had just taken the first step down a path he couldn't turn back from. But now, he wasn't sure where that path would lead. Without thinking, Daniel rushed toward the alley, pushing past the diner's door with a force that nearly slammed it into the wall. His mind was on fire, the image of the man seared into his thoughts. He didn't know who he was, but that briefcase, it meant something. It wasn't just a piece of luggage. It was the key to understanding why everything had gone so horribly wrong. "Wait!" The woman's voice, a sharp warning, rang out behind him, but Daniel didn't stop. He couldn't. Not when the truth was so close. Not when the answers were slipping away. The alley was narrow, its walls lined with graffiti and the faint smell of decay hanging in the air. Daniel's shoes clattered against the pavement, the sound echoing in the emptiness. His eyes scanned the darkened alley, heart racing, but there was no sign of the man who had fled. No footprints, no shadows. Just the distant hum of traffic and the soft rustling of wind in the air. Then he saw it, the briefcase discarded carelessly against the wall. It was half open, the contents spilling out onto the ground. Daniel stopped dead in his tracks, his breath catching in his throat. He kneeled down, his hands trembling as he reached for the case. Inside, he found a stack of papers. His fingers trembled as he flipped through them, each page filled with cryptic notes, names, and addresses. But it wasn't just that. There were photos too. Dark, grainy images of people Daniel didn't recognize, until one image stopped him cold. It was Matthews. But this wasn't a mugshot. This was a private photo, taken in what looked like a high-end restaurant, laughing with a man Daniel knew all too well. His own boss, Detective Carl Harris. Daniel's stomach dropped. The detective, the one who had been working the case, the one who was supposed to be looking for answers, was in cahoots with Matthews. But what was the connection? And who else was involved? Suddenly, the sound of footsteps behind him sent a jolt of panic through his body. He spun around to see the woman, her face pale, eyes wide with fear. "You shouldn't have seen that," she whispered, her voice low and urgent. Daniel's mind raced, his thoughts a jumbled mess. Who are they? What's going on? Why is Matthews tied to my boss? His voice shook with the weight of his discovery. The woman took a deep breath, her eyes scanning the alley nervously. She stepped closer, lowering her voice so only Daniel could hear. "This isn't just about your daughter's murder. It never was. It's bigger than that. Much bigger. Matthews was just one piece in a game that's been played for years. And Harris, he's been pulling the strings." Daniel's pulse quickened. "What game? What strings?" She hesitated before answering, her gaze flickering toward the street as if she expected someone to appear at any moment. "The department has been compromised. Corruption runs deeper than you know. People in power, people who were supposed to protect you and your daughter, are involved in trafficking, blackmail, and worse. And Lucas Matthews was one of their enforcers. But it wasn't just about money. It was about control." The words hit Daniel like a freight train. The detective, the man who had been assigned to Emily's case, wasn't just another bystander. He was an active participant. And now, Daniel realized every failure in the system, every accident that had let Matthews go free, was all part of a much larger, more sinister plan. But before he could respond, the sound of tires screeching broke through the silence, followed by the roar of an engine accelerating rapidly. The woman's eyes widened in alarm. "We have to go now," she said urgently. Daniel's breath hitched. He stood up, the briefcase still clutched in his hands, his mind spinning with the weight of what he had just learned. But before he could take another step, he heard it, the unmistakable sound of a car door slamming, followed by several more footsteps echoing through the alley. "Damn it," the woman muttered under her breath, grabbing Daniel by the arm and pulling him toward the back exit of the alley. But it was too late. The figure that emerged from the shadows was no stranger. Detective Harris stepped into the alley, his face cold and impassive. Behind him stood two men, their postures rigid, their eyes locked on Daniel. "You should have stayed away from this," Harris said, his voice low and controlled. "You don't know what you're dealing with, Carter." Daniel's heart raced, his body tensing in preparation for whatever was coming next. His grip on the briefcase tightened. "You've been covering this up. You've been protecting him. Why?" Harris didn't flinch, his gaze never leaving Daniel. "Because some things are better left in the dark. You should have let it go, Daniel. Your daughter's death was tragic, but it's just a small part of the bigger picture. You have no idea how deep this goes. How many people's lives are tied to this mess?" The woman beside Daniel stepped forward, her voice shaking with the weight of the truth she was about to reveal. "It's not just Matthews. It's not just your boss. It's the whole damn system. They've been controlling the city for years. But now it's time for the truth to come out." Harris's eyes flickered with something dark, something Daniel couldn't quite place. Then, in an instant, the two men behind him lunged forward. Everything happened in a blur. Daniel barely had time to react before the woman was shoved to the ground, the briefcase ripped from his hands, and Harris was standing directly in front of him, blocking his escape. "You don't understand, Carter," Harris said coldly, his voice dangerously calm. "There's no going back now. There's no fixing this. We'll make sure of that." Before Daniel could say another word, the two men behind Harris grabbed him by the arms, dragging him back toward the street. The woman was still on the ground, struggling to get up, but Daniel didn't have time to help her. His mind was reeling. He had come so far. But now, it felt like he was being swallowed whole by the very system he had tried so hard to trust. Harris's last words echoed in his ears as they pulled him further down the alley. As Daniel is pulled into the darkness, he realizes that the very people he thought he could trust have betrayed him. The truth is within his reach, but can he survive the coming storm long enough to expose it? The walls are closing in, and his next move could be his last. The world spun around Daniel as the two men dragged him down the alley, the cold grip of their hands tightening on his arms with every step. The woman's cries were distant now, fading into the background as his mind raced, trying to process what had just happened. The briefcase, the papers, the faces in those photographs, it all rushed back in flashes. But the most important question still loomed. How had he gotten here? How had it all gone so wrong? The man who had taken his daughter's life, the one who should have been locked away forever, was just a cog in a machine, a machine that ran deep into the heart of the system that Daniel had once trusted. His own boss, Detective Harris, the man who had been assigned to Emily's case, had been playing a game all along. A game that, until now, Daniel had been too blinded by grief to see. But now the truth was clear. And as much as he wanted to run, to fight, he knew there was no escape. Not here. Not now. They reached the end of the alley, where a black sedan waited, the engine idling in the darkness. One of the men opened the door, shoving Daniel inside without ceremony. The other man followed, closing the door behind him with a quiet click that seemed to echo in Daniel's ears. Harris climbed in after them, settling into the seat across from Daniel. His face, usually so controlled, was now a mask of cold indifference. He didn't speak for a long time, just staring at Daniel as the car pulled away from the curb and into the night. It wasn't until they were on the outskirts of town, surrounded by nothing but darkness and trees, that Harris finally spoke. "You still don't get it, do you?" he said, his voice low, almost pitying. "This isn't about Matthews. It was never just about him. It was about power. Control. The people who've been pulling the strings, they've been doing it for decades, Daniel. And the best part? They've always had people like you in their pockets. People who believe in justice, in doing the right thing." Daniel's mind raced, the full weight of Harris's words sinking in. "You've been in on this the whole time. You helped him. You helped them." Harris leaned back in his seat, letting out a long, drawn-out sigh. "It's not that simple. You think this system is just about the law? The courts? The rules? It's not. It never was. It's about who you know, who you can trust, and who you can control. Matthews was just one part of a much bigger picture. And as much as you want to believe you're on the side of right, you're not. You're just another pawn." Daniel shook his head, his mind reeling. "But my daughter, Emily, she didn't deserve this. None of this. You let her killer walk free, and you expect me to just sit back and accept it?" Harris smiled, a cruel twist of his lips. "I'm not asking you to accept it, Daniel. I'm just asking you to understand. The people who run this town, they decide who's guilty and who's free. They decide who lives and who dies." The words hit Daniel like a slap. Everything he thought he knew, the justice he had been fighting for, was a lie. The system wasn't about right and wrong. It was about power. And those who had it controlled everything. But as the car turned down a winding road, a thought began to form in Daniel's mind. A thought so powerful, so dangerous, that for a moment he felt his breath catch in his throat. If this was truly a game of power, then maybe he could play it too. Suddenly, the car screeched to a halt, the tires skidding against the gravel. The men in the back tensed, their hands instinctively reaching for their weapons. Daniel's heart pounded in his chest. What was happening? "Get out," Harris barked, his tone colder than ever. Daniel didn't hesitate. The door swung open, and he was roughly shoved out of the car. The world spun for a second, but he forced himself to stay focused. The clearing around him was vast, silent, save for the rustling of leaves in the wind. The cold night air bit at his skin, but it was the dread in his chest that made him shiver. Harris stood behind him, his shadow stretching long on the ground. "This is where it ends, Daniel. You've seen too much. And you're not getting out of here alive." For the first time, Daniel felt the full weight of what he was up against. But something else burned in him now, something more than rage. It was a cold, calculated determination. He had nothing left to lose. No more fear. No more grief. Just a burning desire to make sure that justice, true justice, was finally served. "Then let's end it," Daniel said, his voice low and steady, his hand reaching into his jacket pocket. The next few seconds seemed to stretch for an eternity. The men behind him stepped forward, pulling their weapons from their holsters, but Daniel's instincts kicked in. In a single motion, he threw himself to the ground, grabbing the nearest rock he could find, and threw it with all his strength. It hit the first man square in the face, sending him sprawling backward. The second man, momentarily stunned, hesitated just long enough for Daniel to make his move. He grabbed a knife from his boot, something he'd kept hidden in case things ever went this far, and slashed it across the man's arm as he tried to grab him. The man howled in pain, backing off, But it was Harris who remained the most dangerous. "You think you can outsmart me?" Harris sneered, his hand reaching for his own gun. "You'll never win. This isn't your game, Carter." But Daniel was already on the move. He dove toward Harris, catching the detective off guard, knocking the gun from his hand. The two men grappled, the cold metal of the gun clinking against the ground as they fought for control. In the struggle, Daniel managed to get the upper hand, pinning Harris to the ground. "I may not have the power you do, but I have something you don't," Daniel spat, his face inches from Harris's. "I have nothing left to lose." Harris's eyes widened, but before he could respond, a sudden, sharp noise pierced the air, a gunshot. Daniel froze, and in that moment, the world seemed to stop. He looked down, expecting to feel pain, but there was none. He heard a gasp, a voice choking on disbelief, and then a faint thud as someone collapsed to the ground behind him. Slowly, Daniel turned his head. The woman, the one who had warned him, the one who had led him here, stood just a few feet away, a gun still smoking in her hand. "Get up," she said, her voice firm, unwavering. "It's over." Daniel couldn't move at first. The weight of everything was too much. But then, slowly, he stood, his legs shaky but his resolve stronger than ever. The woman had just ended it. She had ended the game. She had ended the people who had caused all this destruction. Harris was unconscious, the gunshot wound not fatal but enough to incapacitate him. The two men who had tried to subdue Daniel were also down, one with a head injury, the other writhing in pain. As the adrenaline slowly ebbed away, Daniel looked at the woman, his mind still reeling from the chaos of the last few minutes. "What now?" he asked, his voice hoarse. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she knelt down next to Harris, her eyes scanning the ground around them. After a long moment, she finally looked up at him, her expression unreadable. "Now we expose them. All of them. You may have lost your daughter, Daniel, but there's still a chance to make sure this never happens again. To anyone." Daniel nodded, the weight of his actions settling in. Justice had been served, but it had come at a cost he would never forget. Justice isn't always about following the rules. Sometimes, it's about breaking the chains that bind you to a broken system and fighting for the truth, no matter the price. What would you do if you were Daniel? Would you trust the system, or take matters into your own hands? Leave your thoughts in the comments, and let's discuss what justice really means. If you want to hear more stories that challenge what you think you know about justice, make sure to subscribe. Because the truth? It's more powerful than any system ever could be.